What's up, guys, and welcome back to Waggle Friends English. And today we're going to do a follow-up video talking about school, trying to use some of these phrasal verbs that we talked about in our last video.
Yes, so we're going to talk about things like taking a test, writing an essay, and what happens when things don't go your way, how we would describe that.
But unlike our conversation video previously, today's video we're going to talk about what it's been like as teachers, not necessarily just as students, because a lot of times we work through things and we see them from a student's perspective, but now you get to see behind the curtain, if you will, and see what it was like for us as teachers and how we would describe these using phrasal verbs.
Yep. So, first things first, with taking a test, this is a huge part of any curriculum development. If you don't have tests, you don't have a way to really know how well you're doing because you don't get that feedback. Tests are an opportunity to get feedback from somebody who knows better than you how well you are doing.
But I hate tests.
I mean, I kind of miss them.
The perspective of students tends to be that tests are hard or boring or stressful, but like Amber just said, they're actually a way to make sure that you are learning the information that you are required to learn.
Right. So without them, you really have no idea how well you're doing. So for example, parenting, there's no real test for that. You just get to see the results of what you did later.
Which is terrifying.
Which is terrifying. So, but things like this in education, having these tests is a good way to exercise in an environment. It's a good way to exercise taking a test, testing what you know, handling the stress of preparing for it and executing that test, really. And so it's really important and integral to learning.
Yeah, I think it also helps narrow down the amount of information. Like, I think in my mind, when I hear a teacher and they're teaching, there's so much information that I'm trying to process. Like my brain is trying to process their illustrations, their examples, the rebuttals that they have sometimes, that it's hard for me to know, what am I supposed to know?
Right. It's really hard to narrow down.
Right.
And get it down on one piece of paper or one study guide. So, and basically we say sometimes in American English, we'll say regurgitate it on the test.
Right. I want to know what the point of the class is. I want to know what the point of the lesson was.
Absolutely. One of the hardest things is just knowing how well am I going to perform before the time's up?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the pressure, and I think that's the part that scares people the most. But also, now that I have my own kids, and I'm not just a teacher, but I'm also a parent, I wonder if it's just the stress leading up to the exam that's so difficult for certain people, rather than the test itself. Because I feel like in the test itself, there's nothing more you could do, and you kind of just resign yourself to your fate.
Yeah, the idea of time being the stress factor of the whole thing.
Yeah, but it's just once you're in there, I mean, there's nothing more you can do.
You either know it or you don't.
Yeah, you just know, you know it or you don't. And one of the key things that I heard in university that was super helpful to me as a student is one of our professors in freshman year said, you can study all night, but if you don't know it the night before and you don't get a good night's rest, you're not going to do well.
Yeah.
So the idea is you know it or you don't, but instead of saying that right before the exam, do it the night before the exam. So you either know it or you don't. The night before the exam, then take the evening off and go do something not stressful.
Yeah.
Once I heard that, I was able to do much better on exams because I was getting a full night's sleep and I was able to consolidate that information well beforehand, and then give myself lots of time to rest.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, in that way, the reason why as a teacher we give a time limit at all is so that our students, it's actually twofold. It's one, so our students can actually have a break, instead of having a test that, you can just take it however long, that sounds like a good idea to some students, but it's also just that much stress drawn out over a long span of time. Yeah. But more importantly, it's, does this student actually know how to do this problem? If I'm doing a math problem and I have all the time in the world, I may be able to figure it out. But did I really know it if I had to take 2 hours to solve one problem? Right. Not really.
But here's the thing. As teachers, we also know that whatever a student puts onto a test, We also know that that doesn't mean they necessarily know the information. It's probably more like they memorize that in their short-term memory.
Right.
So the way that we test how well you know in your long-term memory is to make you write an essay.
Right. That's the purpose of that, is to actually take that information and chew on it, digest it a little bit, do something with it.
Put it in your own words, not just memorize someone else's words.
Yes, exactly. So you take research, you do research, you know the information, but it's not just a matter of I know information, it's now here's what I do with this information.
Right. So there are some essays that are given as busy work, things like book reviews or like one-page summaries of an article.
Yeah.
Things like that are pretty much busy work, and you can follow the same writing format every time.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter as long as you have done the work and you put the information down. Right?
Yeah.
They're just testing to make sure you did the work.
Right.
But if you write a long paper, a research paper, if you're doing a concept paper on some topic, then what we're looking for is that you know the research, that you've done the research, but not just that you've taken it in, but that you can put it out in your own words in a way that makes sense.
And this honestly was probably one of the biggest errors that a lot of our ESL students would do, is that they would do a lot of good research, but then on the essay or on the paper, they would literally just regurgitate that information. They wouldn't handle that information. They wouldn't draw conclusions. They wouldn't say, now here's where we will go. They just said, this is what it is.
Right. They either summarized it, paraphrased it, or wrote it directly.
Yeah.
Direct quote said, this guy says this guy says this. And my point was, I know what those guys are saying.
Yes.
That's why I'm asking everybody to write on this topic, because I know what it says. What I need to know is if you know what it says, and if you can do something with that and communicate that within the framework that I've built in this class.
Yeah.
And that is a really difficult thing to learn. If you didn't learn it before university, that's a really difficult thing to learn in university because of everything else going on.
Absolutely. And I think that this all comes down to the result of a person that probably doesn't do a whole lot of the application of the information that they've taken in. Yeah, like in writing an essay, is that they tend to fluff up their essay. They fluff out their essay, where it's like, I know this quote and I know that quote, and I don't know how to get from there to there, so fluff, 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 quote, fluff, 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 quote. And it's,
like they'll read up on the most popular articles on the topic, like the first page of Google results or something, and then they'll write down the weirdest things. They'll try to string together and make things super connected, but they're really not, so hence the fluff.
Teachers, we've probably read dozens, if not hundreds of essays on the same topic, because a lot of times we tend to reuse the same essay questions. And so if next semester or next year I get another round of essays, I'm not going to be surprised at what my students find. What I am going to be surprised about is if they have done the work, they know the research and they know the conclusion. That's my expectation, is I want to see the dots connected between the points, not necessarily the points themselves, because I already know those.
Right.
If you fluff out your essay and a teacher is doing his job well or doing her job well, then you will be marked down because it's very obvious.
Right. So from a teacher standpoint, marking students down for doing just recurring things in their homework, in their essays, their projects, their tests, if they're very clearly not grasping the information or caring enough to do something with that information, the teachers take a lot of heat for marking them down for that. But the problem is like the best thing the teacher can do in that situation is mark the student down. Yeah. Because if they don't, then the student can just slide on. Like if things get too crazy, then I just don't have to do it or do it as well as I'm supposed to. So I'm just going to do the lowest level necessary and pass. But the thing is life only gets harder after university.
That's true.
So if you can slide through the requirements, then why would you try later?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
It's really hard.
Yeah, when you kind of develop this habit of just coasting and just being okay with just doing tons of makeup work and just falling behind, and it's like, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
It will catch up, whether or not it's in university or outside university.
Right.
Just the idea of that is incredibly dangerous.
But it's all about your mindset, because it's really difficult to keep trying when you just really don't want to. Right. Or when you've gotten away with not trying before. It's really difficult to be like, to fight that off to do it right the next time.
Right.
So that's one of those things that make sure you are building habits in school and university. Make sure you are building habits that will carry you on in the rest of life. You shouldn't be focusing on just stuff to get through the class, because the goal is not to get through the class. Odds are you're not going to remember it 5 years from now.
Nope.
Okay, not at all. But what you will remember are those skills, and what you will have with you still are those skills. And the patterns that you're setting in high school and university, you're going to be carrying through. You're either going to be fighting them or developing them after school. So make sure you guys are keeping up with that.
And I think that's why it's a big deal when people drop out, whether for life circumstances or whatever. It is really dangerous because you are saying in a way, I give up. And if you start that, it can be extremely dangerous because it's really hard to come back.
For some people, I think it is like, I just give up, I'm done. But then other people, I think it's something else is far more important to me right now. So either school is just not important, or I need to work to make a living, and that's far more important right now than anything else. But then those same people sometimes have to circle back when they have a family and they have a thing to pay for it. In order to get a better job, a lot of them do circle back and finish to get their GED in America. There's a lot of reasons why people drop out, and sometimes it's not totally in their control, and sometimes it's not a personal choice. But it is something that if you can get it done on time, that's far better and easier.
Life does happen. And in reality, and teachers know this too, even though we get paid to teach, in reality, we know that as teachers, a lot of our students will forget the information that I am currently teaching.
Right.
A lot of you will maybe forget this video. And we know that. The purpose, though, is to try to help those students who are eagerly looking out for opportunities to grow and learn, because those are the students that will hold on to that information for a long time. And not just the lesson, but the things that come from the lesson. The lessons learned from the lesson.
Oh. So if you ever hit a rough spot in school, in university, if you're an adult who has gone back to school or to get more education, if you fall behind, don't be disheartened. Just make sure that you're paying attention to that mindset. Make sure that you know that you can do it, because you can. It's just an element of keep going and keep doing so consistently. And if that means developing better habits, then that's what that means. If that means setting measurable goals and just telling everybody in your life from like 1 to 3, I'm doing school, that's what it takes. But make sure it's something that you can do realistically, and that you have a timer set so that you know that this amount of time is going to be dedicated each time, and don't guilt yourself for falling behind. Once you start doing that, it just gets heavier and heavier and heavier.
And talk to your teachers. We care. Our job is literally to help our students to learn. I cannot make my students learn. I cannot make them physically learn something in math or in English. So my goal is to help them to learn. So teachers are helpers.
And teachers, we do a lot up front. We do a lot of work before the class, during the class, after the class, throughout the week, whatever it is. We're working fairly constantly, a pretty heavy load, to make sure that you can succeed as a student. But if you are having problems in your life, things that come up, things that you need to reschedule, whatever, work with your teachers. They want to help. I mean, why would they be teachers otherwise? Like, teachers have a heart for people, and that's why they do what they do. So make sure that you work with your teacher and cut them some slack when life happens to them too.
All right, guys, so that's it for today. As you have seen, we did not use every phrasal verb we talked about in the last video. Like we've said before, that is not the point. The point is to have a natural conversation, a real English conversation, so that you guys can see these pop up every now and again in conversation and how to use them in the right context.
Yep. So that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.
Bye.